Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here, and I just wanted to make this quick intro to this video where I interviewed Kash Patel some time ago, before Trump was even officially the Republican nominee. And we actually began the conversation about Christopher Wray and the FBI. Now, he did end up leaving the show early. I do have to point that out. And I did bring up signature reduction, which I would hope now that he's been named the FBI director, he'll actually address, because he really did claim ignorance. And apparently that's one of the reasons that he left the show. But I thought I would be remiss if I didn't post this interview, especially in regards to the fact that he largely talked about the FBI. And we're also on the heels of this presidential pardon for all crimes that Hunter Biden may or may not have committed since 2014. Coincidentally, of course, lining up with Burisma and more corruption. So without further ado, here is me interviewing Kash Patel.
Why would the FBI offer Christopher Steele $1 million to verify a dossier about Trump-Russian collusion, and then the same FBI offer $3 million to Twitter to squash a story on the Hunter Biden laptop? Do you have any idea why a law enforcement agency would be playing into elections?
Well, you raised a number of different issues there. So first, as to the Steele dossier, that, of course, is a subject treated at great length in the Durham report, which and again, predates my time as director.
I understand that, but it was the same agency paying $1 million to push one story out or try to collaborate one story, and $3 million to quiet another story for political opponents. I don't quite understand.
And then I would, as to the second part related to Twitter, I would disagree with your characterization respectfully. When there are payments to social media companies, that is by longstanding federal law going back, I think, about 4 decades, where we have to pay companies for their costs in responding to legal process. And it's not just social media companies, it's other kinds of businesses as well.
Well, when those stories get out, and you understand, and certainly the dossier story, and I know that wasn't under your watch, but also the Hunter Biden laptop story, that, to me, looks political. To the American people, it looks political. And I'm just an everyday guy. I'm not an attorney, Mr. Wray, just an everyday guy. But to me, it looks extremely political, and that is why you're having trouble keeping the FBI's reputation afloat.
The deep state on full display. We pay companies for 4 decades to censor information. We take care of their legal fees. No problemo. Chris Wray of the cover-up crew getting grilled yesterday, and rightfully so. However, will there be any accountability? Unfortunately, I believe that is doubtful in its current state. We saw no accountability through Barr and Durham. To talk about that and much more, he is the author of Government Gangsters, The Deep State, the Truth, and the Battle for Our Democracy. It is Kash Patel. Kash, let's kick it off with your opinion on how Chris Wray did yesterday, and just that small snippet, because I could have played clips all day long.
Well, thanks for having me back on the program. It's great to be with you. Look, Chris Wray is a tier 1 government gangster. That's what I call him in my book. But to answer your question, the reason he is such is because he has continued to lie under oath to Congress, continued to have an FBI that rigs presidential elections. Whether you're talking about Hunter Biden's laptop or the coverage of the Steele dossier, or how he treats whistleblowers and retaliates against them, or how he pads statistics falsely so he can go tell Congress that domestic violent terrorism tied to Donald Trump and January 6th is on the rise. That's the media narrative they want. This man has no credibility. The FBI does have credibility. And look, I don't know that this Congress is going to act, but that's why, you just got to start doing things yourself. And that's why we finally forced them to start investigating Christopher Wray and Merrick Garland for unlawfully surveilling me when I was running the Russiagate investigation. We just broke that news last night. And so you have to force the American people to pay attention to things that are going to force the levers of Congress to act. They've had 6 months to write it on their own, and they have not produced any impeachment proceedings against Christopher Wray, one of the most dangerous law enforcement personnel figures in U.S. history. So now we got to do it.
So as somebody who's been openly targeted by the FBI and somebody who has been in the depths of this investigation, is there a frustration on your part that you're not able to criminally go after these criminals?
Look, as a former federal prosecutor and public defender, there's no greater personal frustration for me having applied the law uniformly when I was in Obama's Justice Department. I didn't care who the president was. The law was the law and the facts were the facts. But when you have this complete two-tier system of justice that Merrick Garland and Chris Wray and others have set up, along with Rod Rosenstein before them, and the only way to destroy it is to seize back the White House and put personnel in that are going to be FBI directors and attorney generals that are going to do the job. But until we get there, what we must do is impeach them so we can get the evidence out to the American public through the public trial process at Congress. I don't know if they'll impeach Christopher Wray, but I hope so. But the accountability that we can hope for right now, because we're not going to get the convictions and federal charges that we want, but what we can demand from Congress is public hearings, not like the one we saw for Showcase, but subpoenas that produce the evidence and the documentation of the corruption between, let's just go back to your clip, big tech. Big tech colluded with the FBI, and the FBI paid them and had an 80-member task force in the last election cycle alone to meet with Twitter and Facebook and others every week to talk censorship. That is the definition of election rigging. Those are our taxpayer dollars going to the FBI to stifle elections. Congress can immediately seize that money in the appropriations process and the fencing process. They should ground Chris Wray's government-funded G5 jet so he can't stop going around on government-funded vacations paid for by the American taxpayer. And more importantly, they should take the money that allows Congress and FBI to pay these big tech corrupt criminal syndicates over at Twitter and Facebook from rigging presidential elections. They're using our money to do it. It's not their money at Congress, it's ours, and they can take it. I just don't know if any one of these Republicans in Congress has the guts to get together and seize that money. I'm not saying to fund the FBI. I've never said that. But you can take some pieces of some funding, like I've just highlighted, and grind them to a halt until they produce the documentation. Chris Wray has 6 subpoenas from Congress that I counted outstanding in regards to documents he has not given the Congress on FBI whistleblowers, on Hunter Biden's laptop, on January 6th, and the list goes on.
So I want to get back to accountability in a moment, but I also want to discuss the importance of the court of public opinion that you were talking about. One of the greatest illustrations to me was when Tucker Carlson started showing video of the Muffin Man, aka Jacob Chansley, the QAnon shaman, being led around by authorities. Within days, all of a sudden, his sentence was commuted to a halfway house and he was out. That shows you the power of video and the media outside of the court system. However, how do we bring a court system of accountability? And you talked about the big tech collusion. I would argue these big tech companies have always been Trojan horse civilian systems for the military industrial complex. For instance, we now have an article over 2 years ago by Newsweek talking about America's secret military, a program known as an art form, aka signature reduction, where we have over 60,000 people in different arenas under different guises in military uniform and outside in different personas and in some of the biggest companies out there. Now, this just scratches the surface, Kash. As you know, you had former CIA, NSA, and FBI personnel in all the social media companies. So is there a true way out there for reform?
For DOD or FBI, or I'm not following. I don't understand.
For the accountability process within our tech system and our military industrial complex. When you have people who work in the FBI and also work in this arena, and then you have signature reduction, which is now over a decade old. If you're not familiar with it, I'd have you check it out. But we've never had a hearing on it. So we don't know who are these clandestine officers that aren't working for the FBI or the NSA or the CIA, but instead they're contracted, much like the CIA would do with their assets. And this is an open government program, and these people are in the biggest tech companies out there.
Well, former FBI, DOD, CIA, NSA employees are scattered throughout the defense industrial complex and big tech companies. The number 2 at Twitter, the number 2 lawyer at Twitter was James Baker, the former FBI general counsel that was on Chris Wray's payroll as general counsel till we fired him or got him fired because of his corrupt activity during Russiagate. So it's no surprised that these people are over there and then reaching back to their former colleagues to collaborate on how to take down, for instance, President Trump or prevent him from being president. So it's no doubt in my mind that they did it. We proved it. And of course, they're doing it again. I think the larger question is, why don't Congress act to subpoena the records of these companies, the bank records? The money doesn't lie. It's pretty simple. Whether you use video or paper, it doesn't matter to me. Numbers are numbers, and either you got paid or you didn't. And if the U.S. Treasury paid you through Congress and the FBI, then we should know about it, and we should get all the names and find out who was actually doing lawful work and who was doing unlawful work. And as we've seen through Chris Wray's tenure at the FBI, most of it regarding election security, election fraud, election integrity, even chasing down criminals that were purported domestic violent terrorists. All is a lie to rig presidential elections, especially once he wants to be in the business of suppressing key pieces of information, i.e. the Hunter Biden laptop investigation. The world could have known about it, but the FBI intentionally suppressed it. They were too busy meeting and colluding with big tech in their private meetings to tell them, wink, wink, nod, nod, don't put that out. That's pro-Trump. But please put out this. It's pro-Biden. And we all know and see it. And this farce that they keep coming back with, oh, Christopher Wray, I'm a conservative. How dare you say? You're not a conservative. You're a political hack in the swamp who will do anything to keep his job. The fact that you have to highlight to the world that you are or were a conservative shows us how much you have caved to the Biden agenda and the radical left media just to keep your job. You're the same as Milley. You're the same as Austin. You're the same as Mayorkas. You're the same as all these other government gangsters that I talk about in my book. And until we wipe out this personnel, it doesn't matter who goes into what private sector job unless we have leaders at our government agencies that are willing to go after them.
Well, that's interesting because we're in an election cycle right now. And I don't see, I know that you speak on the Reawaken America tour. I do at times as well. And there's a large focus on election integrity. I don't know that we've cleaned up the system. And right now we're having our first town halls in Iowa. What do you see during the 2024 election cycle? Are we going to have free and fair elections? Do we have a system right now with the voting machines and really the lack of audits, let's say, in the system of having a free and fair election?
But look, it's pretty simple to me, and President Trump's been saying it right from jump. Go out and ballot harvest. That's the rule. I don't care about voting machines and anything else. The left spends their money on ballot harvesting. And that's how they won the election in all these states across America. And so if we are not willing to engage in what is the rule of law in most states, in the states that matter, my home state, Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, the ones that are going to decide the next presidential election, then we have no one to blame but ourselves if we don't get our ground game together. And we cannot rely on the RNC or anyone else to do it for us. But the fact that President Trump has been brave enough to go out there and take on what has not been traditionally a conservative talking point about ballot harvesting, his point is clear. Would you rather wake up in 2025 in January and inaugurate President Trump and know that you are being represented in Washington for 8 of every 10 values you have or share with the people that helped put Donald Trump there? Or do you want to wake up with Joe Biden there and say, we're getting 0 for 10 every day for the next 4 years? That's it. It's really that simple. And if people want to complicate matters, that's fine. I'm not an election ballot machine expert or election anything. It's really simple. Go get the votes in your state, drop them off at the ballot box, and get the people registered to vote and convince them that voting Republican lawfully is the right thing to do. And our values, our system is way better. Who is against border protection? Who's against killing terrorists? Who's against safeguarding our children, not force feeding them BS education theories? Who's against men in men's sports and women in women's sports? I know there are people that will say, oh, we're against it, but the majority of Americans are not. The majority of Americans do not want to go into another 20-year war in the Ukraine. President Trump courageously let us out of the forever wars. They want that diplomatic engagement to return to the White House. And we know we have the better policies, so we can't sit on our butts. We have to go out there and collect the votes and ensure that Donald Trump's the next president. That's how you do it. And then if you win and you want to change the rule, then you can. But right now we can't.
What do you say to somebody like me that says there's still a large obstacle in the way of Trump actually getting the nomination for the Republicans, because, there's a widespread rhino mainstream media movement to try to portray him either as a criminal or someone we need to move on from because he's just too controversial. It seems to me, at least on the establishment side, they'd much rather run a Ron DeSantis.
Well, the establishment would, of course, much rather run a Ron DeSantis or anyone else. But whether you believe polls or not, these polls can't lie with this much disparity. I don't care if 50 points has come down to 25 points. A 4-point win is a monster win. And now we're looking at polls that are averaging 30 and 40 points in Ron's home state and across the board. And so Donald Trump's going to be the Republican nominee. There's nothing that's going to stand in his way. He is dominating the landscape because he is dominating the policy agenda that conservatives want to see. He's putting out weekly on Truth Social videos on education, healthcare, border reform, China, Russia, Iran, what we're going to do in the Ukraine, and men and women's sports. He is just doing it on every issue of consequence. So I don't see a single problem with Donald Trump going forward. I see a lot of problems with the other Republican candidates. Now, they might get together and try to take Donald Trump out, but they tried to do that the last 2 times and it didn't work because Americans have responded to the new Republican Party that Donald Trump has created and have retired the old one of Paul Ryan and Liz Cheney and Ron DeSantis and Chris Christie and anyone else who's out there thinking they want to go back to the old ways. We don't want the old ways. We don't live in the past. We live in this present and future, and that's what Donald Trump stands for.